Hi, this is Josh Buden for HolderManager.com. In this video, I will analyze the river aggression factor HUD statistic. River aggression factor is defined as the ratio of aggressive to passive river actions that your opponent makes. Specifically, the number of times your opponent bets and raises the river divided by the number of times your opponent calls on the river. River aggression factor is useful in providing a snapshot of your opponent's river tendencies. Whereas specific stats like c-bet flop and check raise flop are far more useful to gauge your opponent's flop tendencies, by the time you get to the river there are so many branches of possible actions that could have got you to that point. It's more useful to use a general stat like river aggression factor to give you an overall picture of your opponent's strategy on the river. If your opponent has a high river aggression factor, which is anything over a 4 or 5, you should look to bluff catch more often with your weakest hands, as they are more likely to be bluffing. If they have a very high river aggression factor like 10 or more, you may look to even bluff raise the weakest parts of your range. Because they are bluffing so often, it'll be profitable to rebluff them. And likewise, if your opponent has a low river aggression factor, anything under 2 or so, you should call with only strong hands on the river and look to fold your medium strength and weak bluff catching hands. As always, make sure you use the HM3 note-taking function to make a note of the types of hands your opponent is betting river with. How wide they value bet river can determine how high their river aggression factor is. If they're really good and look to value bet super thin in some spots, that'll increase their river aggression factor and also lower the chance they're bluffing, even with an aggression factor that for some other opponents might be bluffs only or strong made hands. Also take a note of the types of hands they bluff river with and make a note of the action they took to get to that stage, whether their flop, turn and river line of betting made the bluff believable or not. If you do want to incorporate the river aggression factor stat into your HUD, I recommend adding the flop and turn aggression factors also, because this gives you more information about what your opponent river aggression factor means. For example, if your opponent has very low flop and turn aggression factor, this means when they get to the river their range is overall stronger. So for example, a river aggression factor of 4 would not necessarily mean they were bluffing a ton on the river, it just means they played their hand passively on earlier streets. However, if your opponent has high flop and turn aggression factors, the same river aggression factor of 4 would indicate a higher ratio of bluffs because they played more aggressively on earlier streets. So we have an example here where our opponent raises pre-flop and we 3-bet a very strong ace-high rundown double suited and we get 4-bet. Given we have high connectivity and high double suited value, we call the 4-bet. And on this flop, we're looking to get it in, even against an opponent who can have aces a high percentage of the time. We have the backdoor spades, backdoor straight draw with our pair and 2 pair outs. But surprisingly, our opponent checks back, and a fairly bad turn for us. Our opponent checks again. We get to the river, and now our opponent bets half pot. If we look at his aggression factor at 7.5, which is very, very high for a river aggression factor, but we also have to take into account that he has a very low flop and turn aggression factors. He's repping aces here, but I would assume aces would just bomb it in on the flop, and we do block an ace. So I think in the absence of any information on this opponent other than his river, flop and turn aggression factors, and especially a factor so high as 7.5, we should be making the call here. So we do make the call based mainly on the HUD stat that we've been discussing, and our opponent had the ace high for a pure bluff. So in summary, the river aggression factor is very useful to provide a snapshot on the river, and if you don't have much information, to help you make some lighter call downs when their factor is high, and to make some tighter folds when their factor is low.